You know exactly what I'm talking about. Why does that which recedes from us gain a disproportionate value? Why do the most genuine gestures, when offered in excess, become invisible? And why, the more you strive to prove yourself worthy of love, the more unworthy you feel? Ancient wisdom teaches us that true power lies not in controlling the actions of others, but in mastering ourselves. Stoicism shows us that inner peace is the only inalienable treasure, immune to external vicissitudes. Attempting to manipulate or force another's affection is a losing battle, a futile endeavor that distances us from the only stronghold that truly matters, our own serenity. The incessant pursuit of external validation renders us slaves to the opinions of others, eroding our autonomy and undermining our peace. True freedom flourishes when we understand that we cannot control the actions or feelings of others, but we can and must control our own reactions and our inner state. Embracing this premise is not resignation, it is choosing wisdom. It is recognizing that the only battle worth fighting is the one waged within ourselves, to cultivate tranquility and self-sufficiency. Picture this scenario. You're in a pivotal work meeting, presenting a project to which you've dedicated weeks of effort. Suddenly, a colleague, with a wry smirk, interrupts your presentation. Interesting idea, but have you considered something that actually works? The room falls silent for a moment, and you feel a flush creep up your neck. The immediate urge is to retort, to defend your work tooth and nail, to expose the baselessness of the criticism. Your mind races, formulating sharp retorts, searching for arguments to silence the sarcasm. It's a visceral impulse, an instinctive reaction of self-preservation in the face of a perceived attack. In another scenario, you find yourself at a social gathering, attempting to engage in light-hearted conversation. Abruptly, without any preamble, someone launches a cutting remark about your attire. Wow, that outfit, that's a bold choice, don't you think? A knot forms in your stomach. You feel exposed, judged, and the urge to withdraw, to disappear, is almost overwhelming. The instinct is to justify yourself, to explain your choice, but an inner whisper, perhaps echoing Stoic philosophy, cautions against the futility of empowering words that do not reflect your inner truth. The energy previously directed towards social interaction now turns inward, focused on containing the wave of discomfort and the yearning for an impulsive retort. The mind, much like a vessel caught in a tempestuous storm, buckled under the barrage of others' words. With each critique, each sarcastic jab, waves of disquiet and anxiety threatened to engulf the helm. It was as if the armor, once a bulwark of inner fortitude, began to fissure under the relentless pressure, allowing negative emotions to breach the deck of the soul. The yearning for external validation, an insidious addiction, held the captain captive, compelling him to seek affirmation in the gaze of others rather than anchoring his security within his own safe harbor. The urgency to retort, to defend, to prove one's worth was a potent compulsion, akin to the wind that inflates sails towards peril. It was a pursuit of applause that was never quite enough, of recognition that dissipated as swiftly as it was bestowed. The sensation was one of being adrift, at the mercy of the tides of external opinion, incapable of charting a stable course. The truth, however, was that genuine strength lay not in silencing detractors or soliciting accolades, but in internalizing the compass, in finding serenity within the eye of the hurricane. The wisdom of the ancients, echoing in his consciousness, offered a beacon through the gloom. Marcus Aurelius, in his moments of introspection, probed the very nature of our afflictions. What is it that distresses us? It is not the events themselves, but the judgments we pass upon them. This reflection hovered like a promise, a reminder that the power to be affected resides within our own perception. Epictetus, with his practical sagacity, implored us to discern between what lies within our control and what does not. Another's words, their intentions, their reactions, these are all beyond our dominion. What, however, is entirely within our grasp is how we elect to respond to these external occurrences. The compulsion to prove something to someone, to solicit their approval to feel worthy, was precisely the sort of attachment the Stoics cautioned against. It was akin to endeavoring to erect a castle upon shifting sands, an undertaking doomed to futility and vexation. True dignity, unshakable self-regard, cannot be conferred by others. It must be cultivated internally, a garden nurtured with self-compassion and acceptance. Each time the impulse to react precipitously arose, an inner voice, recalling these teachings, would murmur, "Breathe, observe. What you can control here is merely your reaction." This pause, this moment of introspection, was the genesis of reclaiming autonomy, the initial stride towards hoisting the sails towards a haven of inner serenity. The armor needed no reinforcing with external steel, but rather strengthening with mental resilience, the clarity of reason, and the serene acceptance of what we cannot change. The storm could continue to rage, but the ship, now under the helm of a wiser captain, began to find its own center of gravity, navigating with greater purpose and diminished fear. The mind, akin to a ship caught in a furious tempest, swayed under the onslaught of others' words. With each critique, each barb of sarcasm, waves of discomfort and anxiety threatened to engulf the helm. It was as if the armor, once a bulwark of inner fortitude, began to fissure under the relentless pressure, allowing negative emotions to breach the deck of the soul. The craving for external validation, a pernicious addiction, held the captain captive, compelling him to seek affirmation in the eyes of others rather than anchor his security within his own safe harbor. The urgency to retort, to defend, to prove one's worth was a potent impulse, much like the wind that swells the sails towards peril. It was a pursuit of applause that was never quite enough, of recognition that evaporated as swiftly as it was bestowed. The sensation was one of being adrift, at the mercy of the tides of others' opinions, unable to chart a stable course. However, the truth was that true strength lay not in silencing critics or soliciting praise, but in internalizing one's compass, in finding serenity at the heart of the storm. The wisdom of the ancients, echoing in his mind, offered a beacon amidst the darkness. Marcus Aurelius, in his moments of introspection, questioned the very nature of what afflicts us. What is it that troubles us? It is not the events themselves, but the judgment we pass upon them. This reflection hovered like a promise, a reminder that the power to be affected resides within our own perception. Epictetus, with his practical sagacity, urged us to discern between what lies within our control and what does not. Another person's words, their intentions, their reactions, all of these are beyond our purview. What, however, is entirely within our grasp is how we choose to respond to these external occurrences. The need to prove something to someone, to seek their approval, to feel worthy, was precisely the kind of attachment the Stoics warned against. It was akin to attempting to construct a castle on shifting sands, an endeavor doomed to failure and frustration. True dignity, an unshakable self-worth, cannot be bestowed by others. It must be cultivated internally, a garden tended with self-compassion and acceptance. Each time the urge to react impulsively arose, an inner voice, recalling these teachings, would whisper, "Breathe, observe. What you can control here is merely your reaction." This pause, this moment of introspection, was the beginning of reclaiming autonomy, the first step in hoisting the sails toward a haven of inner serenity. The armor needed not be reinforced with external steel, but strengthened by the resilience of the mind, the clarity of reason, and the serene acceptance of what we cannot change. The storm might continue to rage, but the ship, now under a wiser captain, began to find its own center of gravity, navigating with greater purpose and less fear. And if I cannot control what they say, and if I cannot alter how they look at me, then what remains? The center remains. The self remains. The capacity to decide, in this very moment, how to absorb the criticism remains. I can let myself sink into the sea of indignation, or I can choose to watch the wave pass, without being swept away by it. The power lies not in evading the storm, but in anchoring the boat in my own safe harbor. And that harbor, that impregnable fortress, resides here, within me. Here, now. The decision is mine. 5 principles, 5 sharp blades, not to wound others, but to forge the self. This is not about manipulation, but an ancestral reminder. True conquest is not of another's heart, but of one's own. You cease to chase not because you have surrendered, but because you have understood that to be truly desired, one must first be complete. Forsaking the need to over-explain is not a sign of coldness, but the wisdom to recognize that mystery resides in depth, not in absence. To master emotions is not to become unfeeling, but rather to possess the fortitude to observe the storm without being swept away by it, knowing that the world is already replete with those who crumble at the slightest silence. You choose to be the axis, the center, the steadfast rock. Saying no when necessary is not an act of rejection, but the understanding that a genuine yes holds value only when it emanates from a well-defined boundary. And above all, you honor your mission, for the love that truly elevates us never leads us astray from our path. It walks alongside us or remains on its own course. Look yourself in the mirror and question, are you the hunter or the altar? Do you wait to be chosen, or do you live as one who has already made their own choice? Stoic wisdom teaches us that strength lies not in controlling external events, but in mastering our own minds and reactions. True peace does not arise from a perfect world, but from the inner serenity we cultivate. Practice acceptance of what cannot be changed. Focus your energy on what is within your control, and discover the freedom that resides in the strength of your own soul. True might is not demonstrated by external dominance, but by internal resilience and the peace that comes from knowing that, regardless of circumstances, your core remains unshakable.